Alright, welcome back. We're making a beef Wellington. We're starting with the meat. This is a center cut filet. You may see it at your store as a Chateaubriand. That's one end of the filet. This has the butcher twine on it. We're going to cook it with that on. Remember to cut it off later. Season it with some salt and some pepper. Get all sides nice and salted. This has been sitting out at room temperature for about half an hour just to make cooking a little easier. You don't want it ice cold. But remember to salt and pepper all sides. Flip it over, get a little bit on that side. And then we're also going to pat it in. Really kind of rub it, get all sides, get the both ends. And just push that seasoning into your meat. That's what you're looking to do. And once you do that, you can put that off to the side. We're going to cook that shortly. You need a mushroom duxelle in a Wellington. So we're using portobellos here. That is new for me. I used to use baby bellas or cremenis, but I saw Gordon Ramsay's last masterclass video where he did the Wellington. So we're going to chop a bunch of those up. We're going to put them into a food processor. This is my crappy little food processor. Don't mind how bad it is. You have to shake it to make it fall down into the blade. But we're going to chop a bunch of, probably about 3/4 of these into a more fine, like that, mixture. And then we're going to cut the rest up into kind of a thin dice that we're then going to just chop a little more finely. That way there's kind of a mixture of textures between the really fine paste-like mushrooms and then the larger pieces. Once you do that with all these, just put them to the side, and we're going to start with the actual cooking process. We're going to, first off here, brown the meat. So here's my carbon steel pan. I want to use this instead of my skillet, just so I can make the pan sauce in this later with the meat fond that's left over. But just throw in some vegetable oil and sear that meat off on all the sides. Don't forget the ends. Every side you can here, really get that nice and fairly browned. And just, you want to lock in the flavors, you want to lock in the juices, and you want to lock in the seasoning. But just get a decent browning on every side. It'll probably take somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes total. You're not trying to cook this at all right now, you're just browning it. Once you pull it out, this is the important step. You're going to coat this in Dijon mustard. You can use, I guess, any mustard you like, but Dijon is the famous mustard for this. Brush it all around and let it, as the meat cools, it will absorb that mustard flavor and texture, and it'll be delicious. Olive oil now into a pan, and just grab a bit of the, you can see the different sizes here. Some are more fine, some are larger pieces. I made way too many mushrooms, so just try to get a mixture of all of those. And the goal here is to cook out all the water. Lightly salt these also, that will help bring out some of the moisture. But we're going to cook these down now. As you can see, this is 2 or 3 minutes in. Water is already coming out of the mushrooms. The majority of a mushroom is water. Look at all that. It just comes flowing out. If you didn't do this step, that would have all come out in your Wellington, and it would completely soak and destroy the puff pastry. So you want to cook that all out here. After probably 15-20 minutes, most of the moisture is fully out, as you can see at this point. They do have a little bit of a moistury shine to them, but there's no water left, and that's what you're looking for. At this point, you can see they look damp, but they are not wet. Put those onto a plate, and we'll worry about them later. Next, we're going to make a crepe. Once we have the crepes, that's what the meat will sit inside of, also inside of the puff pastry. Very simple. You got 2 eggs, you got half a cup of milk, half a cup of water, 2 tablespoons of melted butter, and 1 cup of flour. Also lightly season that with some salt. You could put pepper in it if you want. You could also put chives in this, or any of scallions, any other greens that you're looking for. Some people use spinach. I don't really like those flavors, so this is just a plain crepe. Once you have that fully mixed, put that into a very hot pan that's been slightly greased. I'm just using the oil left over from making the mushrooms, and that flavor will coexist and be lovely. Mix that nice and all around the pan to get a nice thin crepe. About 2 of these will be all you need. Make a few extra if you don't want to worry about it, but once you get that, just make those 2 crepes and you'll be good to go. That's the texture you're looking for. They don't need to be too brown and crispy. At this point, Wet down the area you're going to be working with. This helps the saran wrap, and that is a big part of the next step. As much saran wrap as you can use is important here. That's why I like this industrial size. You're going to use this to roll the puff pastry and the inner layers, and having just a good amount to hold on to is really important. So wetting that down helps it stick to the board. And now we will, first off, get the butcher's twine off of the meat. You definitely don't want to cook the Wellington with that on it. I've done it once and it will totally ruin the vibe. Next, we're going to trim down the crepes so they are somewhat squared, rectangular. Don't overlap too much onto the edges of the meat. You'll see what I'm talking about later. But just get them slightly larger than the length of the piece of filet itself. Slightly overlap them too, that way there's no real gaps. And then we're going to lay in some prosciutto or Parma ham, anything that is a nice long form cured meat like that you can use. I use prosciutto. Really nice. Get all of your pieces laid out like that, and then we're going to put the meat into that, and we're going to roll it and very tightly seal this. First, though, you got to put down your mushrooms. This is the duxelles that we made earlier. It is cooled down. Try to get a nice even spread. You want to have the full circumference of the meat wrapped in the mushrooms. Spread that out nicely, get it nice and even. Then we're going to put the meat into that, and we're going to wrap. You kind of just want to roll it. This is why you want, obviously this is way too wide of the saran wrap, but I would prefer to have too much than too little. If you notice there's going to be a lot of extra crepe, trim it off there. And once you get to the point where you're fully wrapped around, just start to twist it, which will tighten it into a really nice cylinder. Fold the extra layers under and throw that into the fridge. Let that sit in the fridge for about 20-30 minutes, and now we're going to repeat that process with the puff pastry. Lay down the saran wrap again, cut off the edges if there's going to be way too much of them. And now we're also going to kind of roll out the very top and the very bottom, just the parts that are going to overlap. That way they're not double thickness. And then we're also going to egg wash it all so it seals on itself and it seals onto the crepe. At that point, roll it up. Do all of the same steps you did previously with the crepe. Pinch in the ends. If you grab some of the puff pastry, that's also totally fine. You can trim that off at the edge. Fold that under, and now let that sit in the fridge for about 15-20 minutes, and then we can cook these off. I'm going to put a lattice onto this. It didn't really work out, so you'll see that. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. This is a terrible lattice tool. I don't recommend buying one of these. It had a push handle. The handle completely snapped off. But this, as you can see, the overall vibe it's going for, it gives it that kind of nice lacy top. Didn't really work out. So pull that Wellington out. We're going to put it onto a nice piece of parchment paper. Make sure the ends are nice and pinched in. We're going to egg wash this as well. This is just egg yolk. Sometimes if you want, you can use the full egg with the white. And then throw over that lattice. As you can see, it looks nice. But when I egg wash it and trim off the excess, the thinness of the lattice starts to snap. You can see those pieces there have slightly pulled apart, and in the oven they're going to separate. It's not going to look nearly as beautiful. Throw on some nice flaky salt onto the top. I'm going to put a temperature probe into this just to see how the meat is cooking in the oven. And then we're going to throw this into a 400 degree Fahrenheit. I'm using my toaster oven as usual. About 200 degrees Celsius, and we're going to let that cook for somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes. You're looking for about 125 degrees internal, up to 135 after resting. Here's it after it cooked. You could see not many juices came out, which is great. It didn't really leak, but that lattice completely fell apart. Nothing you could do about that. It's still going to be delicious. Look at how easily it separates from the parchment paper. That's how you know the bottom stayed crispy. Cut the cap off or the very end. That is where there's no meat. That's always the chef's cut. And then we're going to cut into this, the first piece. This is always the most glorious piece. Beautiful. This piece is also always a little undercooked. So the people who like more rare meat will take, this is a little more overcooked. People who like more cooked meat want towards the end. I'm going to add some mashed potatoes and a beautiful red wine sauce. I'll put the links, both of those, in the bottom because I've made those before, so I didn't really go over that again. And then I'm going to plate up the second piece. This one I'm going to show you without the sauce just so you can see it a little more up close. But this is an incredibly easy and delicious recipe. Give it a try. It looks hard, but it's not. It's just time consuming.